hold on 1 second. Okay, we should be also live on YouTube now.
Almost there. I'll have it here.
Okay. Let me check. Okay, cool.
Let us know at the time. So yeah, people already they're actually.
Yeah. How's the radio?
It's good. Okay, so we are live.
We
are live on YouTube now.
And Facebook.
Oh, it's good to see everybody. Hey, Mike, how's it going? Kya hal hai is speaking. Kya hal hai means how are you in Urdu. Beej is here. Umayma, welcome. I saw something of yours and I was very impressed. So I kind of know who you are. But she's saying, hi, guys. What a great topic for my first live chat. So, yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be really, really interesting.
Jack is saying live and good idea. Thank you so much for letting us know.
Razib says hashtag cancel the Quran. So yeah, this is cool. We're off to a really good start already.
Great.
All right, so I'm just gonna go into it. Audio is good. Everything's good, Armen.
Good.
All right.
What are we talking about today?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me is Armen Navabi, who's fresh off of you had a trip in Australia, right? You were in Australia.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
For a big ex-Muslim. You just remembered?
Yes.
Big ex-Muslim event?
Yes, and I'm also going to Israel in March.
Israel to collect funding for the show.
Right. I don't know if to collect funding for our Zionist masters. Yeah.
Doesn't everybody thinks that we're funded by the Jews anyway? So might as well.
You know, it actually is so funny that I don't mind it. I kind of want to encourage, like Illuminati and Zionist funding, just so that we can point at it and laugh. It's good. It's good. Yeah. So if
the event went well, I saw the videos.
Yes, and the files are huge, and I'm supposed to be uploading them, and I haven't yet. So I'm gonna do that so that Harris Sultan is gonna do the editing, a lot of the editing. So we're gonna try to release it as soon as possible.
Yeah,
I'm gonna release it on my Ideas Unboxed channel.
Yeah, and I also want to get. It'd be kind of cool to have both Harris and Zara on again, both previous guests, to talk about the event and see how it went. So it'll be kind of interesting. But that's a really good one in Australia. Weather was good there.
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, it was warm.
Also, I met a whole bunch of ex-Muslims that we're gonna have on the show.
We are, yeah. So we're already starting to book some of the. I mean, there were some really amazing personalities that Armen met there. A lot of ex-Muslims there. So we're going to start talking to them. And I actually really enjoy. I know it's really fun to have some of the big name guests here. Like, we've had, for those of you listening to this for the first time, we've had Sam Harris, we've had Steven Pinker, Majid Nawaz, Mariam Namazi, Sarah Haider, but like all of these, Matt Dillahunty. But there's something really special about talking to ex-Muslims around the world.
And one of the I like kind of unique stories. And one of the guests that we're gonna have on, she's a white ex-Muslim, anti-feminist woman whose mom was a convert to Islam, and she was raised under a very strict Islamic family. And she's not your typical ex-Muslim. She doesn't look like your typical ex-Muslim. So that's and she is fucking amazing. Like, her speech was so good, and she's so fun. So having her on is going to be very interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to all of that, all those conversations. So on to the topic today. And today, we chose something that I've been thinking about a lot. And we've had some previous episodes. We had Abdullah Gadal on recently. Well, I mean, towards the end of last year, to discuss. He's the only one who's been on this podcast twice, actually. One for an episode about Muhammad, and the other about an episode about the Quran. So today's episode is titled "Quranic Criticism: Shattering the Myth of Inerrancy." So,
can I add one last thing? Sorry, one of our patrons, and he said not to mention his name. He reached out to us. And I don't know if you know this, Ali. Our YouTube videos has the ability for people to add translations to it. There's an option that anybody could go add translations to our YouTube videos, right? and now he's going to work on the 2 episodes, one on the Quran and one on Muhammad, and he's going to
Yeah,
go and add Arabic translations to them.
that's amazing. So
Yeah.
that's what we were planning to do anyway.
Yeah. So
Um,
isn't that great?
with the patronship.
So
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
if you know people that can't support us financially anyway, if you guys know how to translate, that would be a major contribution to Urdu, to Bengali, anything. Some of our public videos, if you go and you could, there's an option for you to add translations to our videos. So yeah, just putting
Yeah.
that out there. All right, go on. Sorry.
So yeah, so one of the things about this focuses on Quranic criticism.
Okay.
So this is actually an explosive topic, sometimes quite literally, if you've
Okay.
been watching the news. So
Dad jokes.
yeah, so generally, like most people agree that the best way to evaluate any historical document is to do it in a dispassionate way, with reasoned analysis, free of dogma, free of any kind of sentimental or personal bias. I mean, that's how we take any historical document and we analyze it, because we want to get to the truth without biasing ourselves, without trying to get it to fit into a narrative. We just want to take what we have and let the evidence lead to its a natural conclusion, which would hopefully be the truth. But this is a perfectly rational and standard academic exercise. But when it comes to applying it to the Quran, which is believed by people who, Muslims, to be the divinely revealed word of the creator of the universe, it becomes an outrage. So it's a very, very difficult thing to do in public, to have a public discussion that is critical of the Quran in any way. So this is also the thing that makes it the most dangerous, is also probably what makes it the most effective way to arrive at the truth about the history of this religion, the history of Muhammad, and the claims and all the myths that have swayed so many people, 1.6 billion people right now,
But
into
so
its
just to
fold.
be clear, you're talking about academic analysis on the historicity of the stories in Islam. That's what you're like.
The stories in Islam, mainly in the Quran, because Quran is what's considered infallible and inerrant, right?
Mm.
So once we start looking at it dispassionately and really breaking it down and pointing out things that are wrong, pointing out contradictions, pointing out things that are inaccurate, and this is a very, very powerful way to at least begin a discussion. So this kind of thing would start in academic circles, obviously, like a lot of things do, but eventually this kind of discourse does spread wide, because it's based in fact. There are other ways to talk about Islam. People talk about everything from terrorism to whether there's a god or not, those philosophical debates, to immigration, and there's many other ways that people try to discredit it, but none of them are really as effective as going right to the root of what it is. And this also has precedent, Armen. So
In
in
Christianity.
in Christianity. So, what happened was that around the time of the Reformation, one thing that the Reformation did coincided with the arrival of the printing press, is it really opened up the Bible to the masses. It made something that was very opaque, and it was just the property of the church to interpret. It allowed everybody to be able to take a stab at it,
Right.
and it made it transparent to the masses, and then they started talking about it. So from the German Enlightenment, and Germany is actually a lot of the Islamic scholars are also working in
Yeah,
Germany.
what is it with Germany and their obsession with analyzing scripture in a
Well,
historical way? That's a good. I mean, I'm happy that. Yeah.
yeah, but the reason is actually okay, I'm speculating on this, but it seems like the whole discipline of or the academic exercise of biblical criticism actually grew out of the German Enlightenment.
So
So
okay.
it was actually something that took root there, and those are the people who actually started really, really analyzing and talking about the Bible.
Right. But you're
And that
gonna
had
get
a
the
big
accusation. You're gonna get. I'm pretty sure this. I mean, I already seen this, but I'm pretty sure as this grows, you're gonna get people saying, white non-Muslims have no fucking right to, and like what you have to go to Muslim sources or Muslim scholars. There's
yeah.
no. Why are you listening to non-Muslim white scholars about the historicity of the Quran? That's going to be
Well,
an accusation that is going to come from both Muslims and some regressive leftists, I think.
the interesting thing is that they're not all white, right? So many of them, and some of the white people who've been doing it are Muslims themselves. So first of all, let's just say this: that if you're studying Greek mythology, if you're academically involved in the exercise of studying Greek mythology, and you actually believe that Zeus and Hera lived on Mount Olympus and all those gods
Right.
existed,
You're not a
and
reliable source.
you're not a reliable source. You're not the right person to be talking about
Right.
Greek mythology because you actually believe that the
That's
stuff
a,
is true.
that's a good example, Ali. I like that. I'm
Yeah.
gonna use
So,
it.
and the same thing goes for if you're a scholar of Mother Goose and Mother Goose literature,
Okay. Okay.
and you actually believe that there was a fox, who went and, like, I don't know, what was a fox and the grapes, and he gave. If you actually believe all of that stuff, then you're not a credible
No.
commentator on
No, you're not.
all issues relating to Mother Goose, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that many of these people are from Muslim backgrounds. A lot of them who are studying there, I mean, they're just kind of interested.
Doesn't
I mean, they
matter
actually come
though.
from everywhere.
It shouldn't
It
actually.
absolutely should not matter.
Yeah, and actually, Muslim background might give you an bias. I mean, I would even go as far as saying that even if you're an ex-Muslim, I would assume some bias. You know what I mean? Like because there are some passionate. You've been harmed by a religion, right? And
Hmm.
you have some disgust over how it influenced your life, and all that disgust might be justified, but when it comes to an academic analysis of these of the history, I I think that bias might be unhelpful. Like I wouldn't like if I went to even I would see myself as biased as well, right? As an ex-Muslim that has lived under an Islamic regime, right?
Hmm.
So I would see these academic sources as a way of like it's unfortunate that some people might see me as more trustworthy because like well he lived under Islamic regime and like no I'm not as a reliable source as somebody that has studied this with an academic background and through scientific methods. But
Hmm.
people value experience, unfortunately, more than proven methods of studying things. Right?
Yeah.
A white scholar that has never lived under Islam a day in his life, but uses the right methods to study the history of Islam is 10,000 times more of a credible source to talk about the history of Islam than any of us here,
Yeah.
right? Right.
And the other thing is ultimately it comes down to we're not talking about people interpreting the Quran.
No.
We're not talking about sort of a bunch of white people in Germany sitting down and looking at the Quran and saying, well, I think this means this. This verse actually means this. Even though some of them have done that, but whenever they have done it, like Christoph Luxemburg, when he did and that's, by the way, a pseudonym, when he talked about the Syro-Aramaic roots, etymological roots of Quranic verses, and that's the famous one where he said that it wasn't actually virgins, it was grapes that they were talking about, or raisins. Then
Oh yeah.
whenever they
Holy
do that,
fuck.
yeah,
Yeah,
they,
that's
they do
stupid.
it based on, like, he's not interpreting it according to what he thinks is right. He's interpreting it based on an actual language. So, for instance, the people who study the Quran, the academics, they're not interpreting the verses. They're actually looking at the history of it. They're looking at how old this text is. They have several different approaches
Mm.
that they take to it. Right, so they can take textual approaches. They can look at the sources.
Right.
They can look at the language, the form.
See, it's
They
not
can,
about the people though. It's about the methodology, right?
yes,
It's we're trusting the methodology. These are methods that have been tested for over years, and
hmm,
we are putting the trust in the methods that they use rather than the individuals, right?
right.
And we should invite these people, by the way, on the show. What are some?
We are actually, I'm not gonna say it until I have them confirmed, but
Right,
I've got a bunch of people lined up.
right.
We're gonna be coming on. So, um, so one example, for instance, just an example to give, is that because this stuff is rooted in fact, sometimes it doesn't really matter whether who discovered it, whether it was like a white person or not. And one of the best examples recently of this is the Sana manuscript. So there is constantly this claim, the Quran itself says that God has protected the scripture. So this idea that not a single word, not a single punctuation mark in the Quran has ever been changed. Now that myth was blown apart by an undeniable event that happened in the early 70s, and that was a discovery of the Sana manuscript of the Quran in Yemen. Right. So this was right. So this was basically, it was a parchment. That means it was like animal skin or something like that on which these verses were written. And
it was an X-ray or something done on it.
Yeah, then they did an X-ray. So it's called what it's called. I don't know how to pronounce this. So the word is palimpsest, right? Palimpsest means, it sounds like some weird fetish thing, but it's actually a document that has two layers. So it is, because I guess paper was hard to come by at that time, or parchment. So what they would do is they would
paper
write
is so
one layer.
expensive. So instead of like writing a new version, you would just write on top of it.
You'd write on top of it. So you'd erase the old version, and then you'd write on top of it. So there is an upper text and there's a lower text. The upper text is the one that was written more recently, and the lower text was written.
I have the perfect
previously.
Islamic apologetic argument for this, but go on. Like I know how to, I know what to say as a Muslim to this. But go on.
So let me just kind of explain for those who don't know about the Sana manuscript. So this was something in 1972. They were restoring a big mosque in Sana'a in Yemen. And this manuscript was discovered. So it was a palimpsest. It had two layers to it, and it turned out the upper text was essentially identical to the what they call the Quran that Osman compiled. Osman, the third caliph of Islam,
the canonized version of the Quran that we have today.
Right? So that was consistent with it, but the lower text had several differences from the standard text. Right, so this wasn't a complete Quran. They had quite a bit of it, but they didn't have the entire book. But they did find that there were many fairly significant differences in the lower text, the one that was written previously. So they went ahead and they dated it, right, to see how far it was. So they did the radiocarbon dating, and they dated it to around the late 6th century. To the mid 7th century, so around. Let me actually look this up. With 95% accuracy, a radiocarbon analysis dated it between 578 CE or 578 AD and 669 AD. So that's that's around the time that Muhammad lived. Right. So this is consistent with the Islamic claim that the Quran was, quote unquote, revealed during this time, right?
Right.
So obviously not. So this was the range that it was.
So here's the
okay.
The argument that I think Muslims would have for this is that they have their own version of this happening. I mean, this story we don't know how much, if it's true or not, because it's the hadith, and we don't know if any of the hadith is true. But we have part of the canonized story of Islam is, according to hadith, is that parts of the Quran was eaten by a goat, right? So we know based on Islamic source. I mean, we don't know, but according to Islamic sources itself, the Quran has changed, right? Not just according to these scientific and new scientific analysis of ancient scripture, but according to the hadith itself. There were some verses that were eaten by a goat, which is good because that was the stoning verses of adulterers, right? But also there were parts that there's hadiths that some people have forgotten some of the verses, and it would never made it in. There was entire surahs that were forgotten and never got canonized.
And they were actually added on. So in the Quran, when people remembered things later on, the Quran was added to. So it was built. It was an evolving document in terms of the quantity of verses,
right?
And things were added on to it as well.
But the argument for that is that that's all by God's design. God had some verses that were supposed to be there for a period of time, and then he removed them and changed them based on his own will. Like, this is not a mistake. Obviously, like according to Muslims, nothing is a mistake. There's not a single atom, there's not a single electron, or even subatomic particles that don't move unless Allah wills it, right? So, you know, just like some verses are abrogated, like some later verses removes the relevancy of some previous verses. Sometimes God on purpose makes people forget certain verses and not make it into the original canonized version because that was his will. And that whatever the Quran, when they say nothing has changed in the Quran, they say the plan of God, and this is very, very convenient, right? Because anything that if they say Quran has never changed, but then when you point out that it actually has changed, we're like, well, what God intended it to be has never changed. Well, that's stupid. I realize that because then how is that a miracle? Because anything we change in the Quran, then you're gonna say, well, that was the finalized version of it was what God intended it to be. Like, so there is no way for your miracle not to not have. How is this a miracle, right? That it has never changed, because even if it has changed, all of a sudden you're going to say, well, that was by design. Like, it's such a circular argument that is stupid.
Yeah.
But that
Well, I mean, there are people who are just not going to accept. Remember, there are people who don't believe dinosaurs existed. So radiocarbon dating does not compel, is not convincing
yeah,
to everybody.
but even if they
So
don't accept that, they have stories themselves that suggest the Quran has changed. You know what I mean? They don't, even if they don't look at
yeah,
the the carbon dating stuff. They within their own stories, the Quran has changed. And
yeah.
again, I don't know if any of these stories are true, um,
Hmm.
but that's according to their story. So, but what do you think about the argument that they give?
I mean, if they think that I
That's
don't
that's
really see a way around it.
yeah. I mean, that I know it's dumb.
I mean, like the thing is that there are people who are going. Well, what's going to happen is that there's always going to be somebody who's going to give some kind of argument against it. Okay,
Right, right.
you know how there are people here saying that nowadays they say Muhammad was the first feminist and Islam was the first religion to give women equal rights. This is probably something that would have outraged Muslims, 200 years ago if someone had said it then. I wouldn't be surprised if, 50 years from now, people are saying, well, Islam was the first religion to give gay people equal rights, right?
Yeah.
So there is
Fifty
whatever,
years from
however
now.
things.
50 years from now, I'm hoping
Oh yeah,
Islam
yeah.
is dead by now. By then, but go on.
Well, let's see. So there are. I mean, there's always going to be people who think that, but what happens is for the majority of people, who are not as invested in this, who are not as invested in apologism and trying to defend it at all costs. When when you do present certain facts, like if you like this idea that the Quran has changed. When I grew up, the idea was that not a single punctuation mark in the Quran has ever been changed. But now there's enough information out there for most people to accept that yes, there have been different versions of the Quran, and it has evolved. So that is a development. Right? There's sometimes when new things are discovered and they're factual, that makes a difference. But I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about what we know about that time, and some of this we did cover in those other two podcast episodes. But one thing that Sean Thasir, who's our previous guest on this podcast, I was talking to him once, and he just mentioned, he's like, imagine if the very first, no, we're talking, let's say, about the biography of Muhammad, right? Imagine if the very first written account of Napoleon's life was written in 2019. Right? Imagine.
Okay.
So he lived 200 years ago,
Right.
and the first written account of him and his
Ooh.
life is written today. How reliable would that be? How would we look at that and say, okay,
That's
is
a
this
very good
mythological?
example.
Is this a
Yeah.
legend? That's exactly what the situation is with the life of Muhammad. So
Right.
Muhammad, everything else apart from the Quran and the Treaty of Yathrib, which we'll get to in a bit, everything apart from that, everything that you know about Islam, everything about his biography, all of the hadith collections, everything you talk about, all that were put down in written form over 200 years after
After.
Muhammad's death.
Okay, but this is okay. This is very important because a lot of people look at the gap between the 200 years after till now and just see it close enough to Muhammad for it to be reliable. But when you put it in that, because 200 years is a lot after his alleged lifetime. If when you put it in that perspective, because a lot of people just see things in history as in the past and all close together, right? Which is such a I mean, I think somebody mentioned that Cleopatra is closer to the moon landing than she was to the building of the pyramids, which shows you but people just put things in history as close together. But when
that's an illusion.
Yeah, it's an illusion. But when you put it in that perspective, Napoleon, first biography of him, 2019, that actually makes it very clear. That's a very good example. Let's
just look at some of the things that happened in 1819. So I'm going to open up the Wikipedia page for 1819. So 1819 was the year that Thomas Jefferson, 200 years ago, this is when Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia. Right?
Right.
Who was born in 1819? Let me see if I can recognize some of these names. Right? Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. Queen Victoria was born in 1819 on May 24th.
Yeah.
Oh, she was a Gemini, just like me. I don't know what that means.
All right, good. Let's go. Okay,
but I mean, this is the thing. So if you have 200 years is a very, very long time. So that's the first time.
And what's the first autobiography of Muhammad? What's the name?
Okay, so the first biography of Muhammad was written by a man named Ibn Ishaq. That was written about a little over 100 years after he died, but that biography does not survive to today. So that biography was edited. Name? Ibn Ishaq. IBN space ISHAQ, and then so that got lost. It's
not, okay. So sorry, my English is not. It's not autobiography because Muhammad doesn't. It's just biography.
No, he didn't write
the first biography didn't survive, but then we have other authors claiming to have copied that one.
Yeah, so the person who edited it was Ibn Hisham. So his edited version of Muhammad's biography, that was published. Well, published. It was printed or put down in written form. Published essentially. 200 years after Muhammad was born. So everything that we know about him, from the cave of Hira to the names of all the caliphs, to the names of the imams, to his sons, daughters, Karbala, Hussein, Hassan, Ali, everybody, Fatima, that was all. The only reason we know that is from this biography that came 200 years after he died.
Okay, but what about the hadith then?
Hadith, the first collection of hadith, the first big collection of hadith, was put out about 215 years after Muhammad's death. Okay,
but people say Muslims,
or I should say over 200 years. I can't remember the exact number.
But Muslims will say, look, the methodology of the collection of the hadith was very good. Like the chain of narration and all that. Yes, it was more than 200 years after, but they did a very good job to make sure that the chain of narration was based on people that were trusted, that they verified that these are authentic sources, and these chains of narration were from multiple independent chains that couldn't have been true because that couldn't be false.
I get it. It's the same circular argument. The people who are saying that all of these sources were authentic are the same people who are saying that that the hadith are authentic, right? I mean, it's. So they're how do they find out these sources were authentic? How do they know? They know it by the same way that they think the hadith is authentic, which is oral transmission. So there's no way. None of these people were at that time. They don't know how things have gotten changed. Your dad tells you something, you tell your kid something, your kid tells somebody else. You've played in the same room at the same time.
Right.
If you play broken telephone, you know how that ends up.
Right.
At the end,
and
inevitably.
It's one of the most. It's very interesting that they say that their method is even better. It was in modern standard. It was as rigorous as as the scholars today, which is ridiculous because one of the things that they use in the chain of narration is how trustworthy these people were, and they are trying to measure the trustworthiness of people that have died many years ago that they have never met, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is incredibly stupid. So and yeah, as you mentioned, and also another very good way to see how unreliable these chain of narration were is that a lot of the hadiths that came out, even the ones that are now considered sahih or authentic, were very politically convenient at the time that they came out for the needs of the people in power at the time. Like it was very just the same way that Muhammad's Quran verses were very convenient for what he needed at the time. These hadiths were very convenient for the Khalifas or the other people in power when they came at the time. But go on, Ali.
Yeah, so it's also kind of interesting the way that the hadith did come around. I mean, some of you may have wondered, including Muslims, that how did stoning to death for adultery end up in the hadith? How did circumcision end up in the hadith? How did all of these things that are part of Jewish scripture end up in the hadith, right? Like where did all this stuff come from? So again, the first time that there were the first collections that were put out were over 200 years after Muhammad's death. When they were being compiled, there were many Jewish converts to Islam. And they were, a lot of this process started in Kufa in modern day Iraq, right? And the Jewish, these scholars, like a lot of the isnads were the people who transmitted the oral hadith down.
The chain of narration, yeah.
The chain of narration. They had experience with that. The people who had a lot of experience with that were people who were Jewish converts because, since there's a strong oral tradition in Judaism as well, which sounds really funny, but I don't mean the innuendo.
Oh my God!
You're
such a dad. Okay.
Oral transmission. Okay. So it was, you have the oral Torah, you have all the rabbinic, the Talmud, all of that. So a lot of this, I can't get it out of my head now. A lot of the oral transmission tradition.
I'm now imagining a lot of Jews through the line of history just giving. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, great. Thanks for that image.
So there was so they had that tradition. So they were actually relied upon. A lot of the ones who had converted to Islam were relied upon to do this process because they had some experience with it. So when the hadiths were compiled, it's one of the reasons that you see a lot of Jewish things in the hadith that are nowhere to be seen in the Quran, like circumcision, like stoning to death for adulterers. I mean, these are not things that are mentioned in the Quran, and these are the things that actually made it into Islam. So it's when you look at it. So here's the idea of when you're sort of criticizing the Quran and the hadith or scripture, and you're looking at it historically. You look at where things were done, how they were done, who was doing them. And it explains many things. A lot of the pieces of the puzzle that were, completely mysterious.
Okay, what's the explanation? Tell me.
Explanation for what?
No. Okay, so what does that tell us? So you're saying that a hadith is a Jewish conspiracy? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what I'm saying. All of Islam is a Jewish conspiracy.
Okay.
It came from there. You've got Shalom and Salam. You've got all the same prophets. You've got everything. It's the foreskin issue.
We just lost all our Zionist sponsors. Thank you for that, Ali.
No, so it is. I mean, of course, these things are related, and they actually go even further back. I mean, it's kind of. Interesting, even if you tie it up to, we're getting a little off topic here, but if you tie it to Eastern religions, like the word Ibrahim, right, or Abraham, is rooted in Brahma. Brahma is the most supreme spirit in Hinduism. Brahmins are the highest caste in Hinduism. Abraham, the story of Brahma and Saraswati, right, who was his partner, and Abraham and Sarah, there are a lot of parallels.
All right, let's come back though. So there's the biography, and
that's gonna make the Hindus very happy, by the way.
No, don't make them happy. There's a couple of different things happening. Right? You have the hadith, you have the biography, and you have the tafsir, right? And these are all texts separate from the Quran that
Yeah.
might make it a little bit confusing for people. What are we talking about, right? So the tafsir is very easy to understand. This is just people looking at the Quran and using the hadith to try to come up with interpretation of what these verses mean. Okay,
Right.
so that's just the tafsir. So let's put the tafsir away. But then the biography and the hadith, how do they play with each other? Like, does the hadith use the is a lot of the hadith is the biography based on the hadith, or is the hadith based on the biography, or they're independent from each other? Because a lot of the how a lot of the stories that we Muslims say is based on these biographies. But then they also
Hmm.
say the only thing you can trust is the hadith, if it's if it's sahih, authentic hadith or not. So
Yeah.
why are they constantly going to the biographies if they say that the only, other than the Quran, the only source that you could trust is the hadith? And again, what to be clear to people, what we mean by the hadith are those sayings and according the sayings of Muhammad, what he said and what he did, which according to Quran, Muhammad is the perfect role model, and you have to follow his way of life. So how would you do that unless you have a collection of what he said and what he did? And that's where the
Right.
hadith comes. It's a complementary to the Quran. The Quran is the direct word of God. The hadith is the sayings of Muhammad, the things that Muhammad said and did. Is it did also, or yeah, did as well?
Yeah.
But
So said and did, the actions and
so
the traditions of Muhammad.
yeah,
So the thing is, there is a that's a really good question. I actually don't know if the Ibn Hisham biography, the first surviving biography of Muhammad,
right,
and the Bukhari collection of these, the first one that was published, the collection of these, whether they coincided. Ibn Hisham actually died in, I just looked this up, in 833 AD,
right,
right? So it seems like the biography came before the hadith actually saw the light of day, at least on paper. I mean, people will argue, of course, that the hadith have been around for ages before that, for
right,
200 years in the whole oral tradition, but we're just looking at what was documented, right? So in this
right,
case, so it seems that the biography came first, right?
right,
But that's a good question. I don't know whether they came independently and they were I'm pretty sure Ibn Hisham, obviously, if he was compiling, the biography of Muhammad, he had read the Ibn Ishaq biography existed. A lot of these hadith collections were floating around
right.
the entire time as well. So it was probably a compilation of everything. It wasn't like these two things were distinct phenomena that were happening in
So
completely different labs.
my speculation is that a lot of the hadith that was accepted was also based on the accepted story about Muhammad, right? So these
Hmm.
biographies influenced the hadith a lot, right?
Yeah, they must have.
But I think it's very interesting because Muslims themselves focus on the life of Muhammad, even though they say that the hadith is the only authentic source. But life of Muhammad, the place that we go to read it is these biographies, which is
Hmm.
not considered necessarily an authentic source according to Muslims themselves, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird because, but the thing is that the biographies came first, right? So that is at least closer to Muhammad than
That is, yeah.
than the
I'm
hadith, right?
Sahih al-Bukhari was completed around 846 AD, and Ibn Hisham, the biographer of Muhammad,
Mm.
died at in around 833. So that was definitely
Right,
earlier. So one of the questions, so the question here is, and just for reference, Muhammad died in the 630s, so over 200 years before. Um, so one of the questions is that is there anything that survives that is from that time? That's from Muhammad's lifetime
the Quran
that we
and
can
the
show.
Constitution.
The Quran and the treaty of Yathrib in
Oh,
Medina,
the
right?
treaty, right?
Yeah, the
Wasn't
treaty
the
of
treaty
Yathrib
the
between the
constitution
Jews.
of the government, or no? Was it just
Yeah, it
yeah?
was. So,
Okay,
so they basically decided how to run it. It's used by a lot of apologists to say, look, this is one of the few surviving documents from that time, and he made a treaty with the Jews, so that means that he was willing to work
right.
with people. So
So
that's also another way that it's
okay. So
spun.
basically, let's clarify what you're saying. So if we put away the hadith and the biographies and be like, this shit was way too old. Okay, so what what we're left with is just two pieces of document that we know that was way before the hadiths and their biographies that were, and I think has been carbon dated to show that it was at the time, like close to the time of Muhammad, right? Like, can we verify that? Okay.
So, so the Sana manuscript is verified to the late 500s to the late 600s.
Right,
So
and both the Quran and this treaty do mention Muhammad by name. Is that correct?
Yes. So,
okay.
so
I mean, I know the Quran does, but does the treaty document does?
Yeah, the Treaty of Yathrib does as well.
Okay.
And
do they refer to him as Muhammad ibn Abdullah or Muhammad? Yeah,
that I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know.
Okay.
Let's see what it does. But I'll look that up. But the
But how old are they actually? How far away are they from the alleged date of? Like, are they close or are they exactly like how many years after?
Well, I mean, the Constitution of Medina, the Charter or the Treaty of Medina was from 622.
And when did Muhammad die? Allegedly?
633 or 632 AD.
630, 622. So this would suggest that this is definite proof that Muhammad existed as a person.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's no doubt that Muhammad existed. I don't think
I know that, but I just want to tell people what is the definite proof that we have that Muhammad existed.
Yeah. Okay. So there is So there's it's almost certain that Muhammad existed. The only thing is that the only thing that we know about Muhammad from that time, from his lifetime, through these surviving documents, is the stuff that we know is very, very scant. So here's one super interesting thing that totally blew me away when I found out is that all of the things that we have in the Sirah of Muhammad, the biographies that came out 200 years after he died, and the Hadith that came out 200 years after he died, but the Quran is the only document that is from that time. But hold on a second.
But somebody's contradicting us in the live chat. So they're saying there are absolutely no documents from Muhammad's time. The nearest ones are 30 to 80 years after Muhammad's death. That's what ARNNN is saying. Is that true?
No, that's not true.
Okay.
That's not true at all. We just mentioned the
Quran and this treaty itself is.
There are. I think what he may be getting mixed up is that the first mention of Muhammad's name after his death on any official state document, after the Constitution, after the Quran after his death, was around 690, and it was on a coin, right? Yeah. This is also in Tom Holland's
I know. Okay, I know the coins, but and again, sorry, he or she, ARN, is saying there was no specifically no Quran from his time. Do we have any Quran that was?
The Sana manuscript. Sana manuscript is dated with 95% accuracy from Muhammad's time.
Okay, not 30 years after his death. At his time.
Okay. No, it's they give you a range, right? So the range is from the late 500s, from like 570 something to 670 something.
Okay, where can people? He wants the source. So where can people find? I mean, how do you spell?
The Sana manuscript is like, you can just Google it. You can find all of the scholarship around it. It's a very, very widely written about source. And as I said earlier, I'll find it again. The radiocarbon analysis is dated the parchment of one of the detached leaves sold at auction, and hence its lower text. The lower text, not the recent one, to between 578 AD and 669 AD with 95% accuracy. And this is from Sadeghi and Bergman. It's a paper that was published in the Arabica Journal.
Okay, ARN, if you're saying it's not, tell us why you think that. Like, she's shouting at us, right? He's saying it's not, it's wrong. But tell us.
Yeah, that doesn't make it.
No, I know, but tell us why we're wrong. Like, it's good to have this, by the way, in the live chat. But did the pieces that they found, does those pieces, did it mention Muhammad on it?
The pieces that they found? That I don't know about.
Because it would be. I want to know if they found any document that was carbon dated from Muhammad's time, alleged Muhammad's time again, that has Muhammad, because Muhammad's name on it, because if they find pieces of the Quran that doesn't have Muhammad's name on it, then it will still then Muhammad's existence will still be up in the air, right? Because then maybe the later versions that they found, maybe they added Muhammad in there after. Again, I know I'm just trying to be as skeptical as I possibly can be. Let me see. ARN is saying it's false to claim that the what is this word? Can you read what he's saying?
Let me just take a look at it. If it's false to claim the palimpsest is that old, because the parchment could be and likely was much older than the writing.
Oh.
Well, yeah, but it's but I mean, you can go by the document. No. That's
a fair
actually not
point.
true either.
Why not?
There's a problem with that because what they did was they actually dated. There were chemicals in the ink.
Right.
So this is sorry, ARN. This has been done in a lot of detail. There's I mean, I've got all of this in front of me, so I can't read it out.
But
all
we
of
could
it,
be wrong. But yeah, I mean, it's good.
But you can read it out. There's the ink. So they've actually dated the lower text. They analyzed and radiocarbon. They did radiocarbon analyses of both the upper and the lower text, right? And the lower text, which is the older text, was dated between 578 and 669 AD. With
669. You said so the latest it could be 669, and Muhammad died in 630.
Yeah, and the earliest it could be is 578.
Yeah, but the latest. But based on what you said, the latest it could be is 669. That's 39 years after Muhammad's alleged death.
Right.
So it could still be after.
It could, and it could be that we don't have the date of Muhammad's death right. I mean, that's also another thing. There are mentions
but
of Muhammad.
It could still be made up.
There are non-Muslim historical, non-Muslim sources of Muhammad that mention Muhammad bringing an army that date to 636 AD. Right, so he's mentioned by name in other historical documents. They're scant, but even outside Arabia, they're mentioned.
No, they didn't. But those other documents didn't mention him by name.
They did. They did.
So there's historical the king documents. Of Arabs I think or something.
Yeah, no. There was the Roman. I mean, when he went, there's something about I can't remember exactly, but I can look it up for you if you want.
Okay. No.
About Muhammad actually taking his army and he's showing up with a huge
army. Did they say Muhammad?
Yeah. Okay. That's this is a thing.
Theo is
I'm talking about mentions of Muhammad.
Theo is asking, what does the treaty say?
The treaty is just basically between the Muslims and the non-Muslims of Medina. So it was just about when he moved to Medina, he saw the people who welcomed him there, and then he said, here are the significance of the Ummah. The rights of the non-Muslims who had it there, freedom of religion. He actually allowed freedom of religion. Of course, that didn't last too long until Ghazwa al-Khandaq, when they had that war, and then he ended up massacring 400 of the Jews. So there's like the Quran, it was full of contradictions. But here's the thing: so from the lifetime.
ARN is saying that the non-Muslim sources what they mentioned was a prophet. They didn't mention Muhammad.
No, they didn't. They actually did not mention prophet. They mentioned Muhammad. They didn't think he was a prophet.
Ooh, there's going to be some major disagreements here. Okay.
Why would non-Muslim sources mention a prophet when they don't believe he's a prophet? They just thought of him as a
come on. Prophets were the thing back then. Prophets were showing up left and right. So
okay, we're getting sidetracked.
Okay. No, it's fine.
No, I'll look it up. Hold on. I'm curious now. So,
okay, but this is cool. Like I like to have these disagreements. Okay, so we have the Quran and the treaty. Even if they weren't at the time of Muhammad, they were the oldest ones, right? That mention anything Muhammad. But they don't mention much. The key point here is that these two documents don't tell us shit about Muhammad. Like they don't tell us. Don't give.
What we want to get to.
Yeah, they don't get this guy could have been anybody or anything, and 99% of all the stories about Muhammad, even more actually, is completely in the other documents that we said is completely unreliable, like all the hadiths and the biographies. These two documents that we refer, like the Quran and this treaty, doesn't say about anything about where Muhammad was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say about where he was born. Didn't say anything about what he believes in. Didn't say anything about what he did, whose mother was, who his father was, about the Hajj, about zakat, about prayer. None of that is in there, right? He could have been anybody and lived in any, so that's the key. Like, we even have arguments now that he wasn't even born, even if he's real, he wasn't even born in Mecca. Like, he was born
Yeah.
in fucking Jordan. Like, which none of these documents can prove otherwise. But let me see what the live chat is
So
saying.
actually, ARN and I are both right about one thing.
Hmm.
So Aaron, I'll give you this. Someone, this is from In the Shadow of the Sword. This is Tom Holland's book.
Yeah.
He says, quote, "To be sure, there are very few scholars who would go so far as to claim that the prophet never existed. Someone by the name of Muhammad does certainly appear to have intruded upon the consciousness of his near contemporaries. One Christian source describes a false prophet leading the Saracens in an invasion of Palestine. This was written in AD 634, just 2 years after the traditional date of Muhammad's death. Another, written 6 years later, refers to him by name." Right. So there were both of these. So there was a source that actually said that he was a false prophet, and there was another source that actually referred to him as Muhammad, and this is from around the time that he lived.
Okay, treaty. So Theo Mikey is asking, do we have the treaty in manuscript from form, or do
Yeah.
we? Yeah, do we have the full document available?
Yeah, we should have. Yeah, we've got the full document. So,
Wow, okay.
so the Quran and what I was going to get to is the thing that really blows me away about the Quran. That when it comes to his contemporaries, if we're trying to look for biographical details of Muhammad from the Quran,
Right.
you find the names of all the old prophets and the Noah's flood and all the other stuff that's in the Old Testament, but you don't really find the names of any of his contemporaries or any of his friends. So there's no Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman in the Quran. There's no Fatima. There's no Ali, Hassan, Hussein. Nothing.
Okay, but to be clear, there are some stories like in the Quran that refers to a companion of Muhammad that is believed to be Abu Bakr, like the one with the spider at the cave. When Muhammad when Muhammad.
Ankabut.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
When Muhammad was running away from Mecca to Medina, the person that was with him, that the Quran refers to.
Is not in the Quran.
What?
It's Surah 29 of the Quran, Surah Ankabut. But that incident about how the spider web protected him, that is not. It doesn't say anything about that in the Quran.
Oh, okay, but it refers to it.
Yeah, so I mean, his wives are referred to, right? In that thing, like when they were his wives are
but
fighting
they were not
over
mentioned by name.
Yeah, but none of them are mentioned by name. Nobody's mentioned by name except for two people,
Zayd.
two of his contemporaries. One is Zayd bin Harith,
Zayd, yeah.
right? Who is his adopted son, and the only reason he's mentioned is because he wanted to make clear that your adopted kids are not
Muhammad
your real
was
kids.
Mentioned? Muhammad is mentioned?
Yes.
And,
I mean, apart from himself.
And
the other one is Abu Lahab, his uncle Abu Lahab, who was
for cursing him with the necklace of fire.
Yeah. So that animated him. You brought his name into it because he just didn't like him a whole lot.
Right.
So it was kind of like it's a lot like Trump's tweets.
Yeah.
He mentions.
Hey, I said that first. Okay.
I know you did. That's why I brought it up.
Right. So, but
he only mentions people that he hates. So I mean that's really all we have. Otherwise, everything else is just about hellfire, philosophy, taking care of orphans. This is very general stuff.
Aaron, you're correct that the Quran does mention Isa, Maryam, and Maryam is the only female figure that the Quran ever mentions. But what Ali was referring to was people during the time of Muhammad. The only two people that is mentioned during the time of Muhammad. I mean, Musa is mentioned. A lot of people are mentioned. But the only two people other than Muhammad that was allegedly lived at the time of Muhammad that were mentioned is Abu Lahab and Zayd.
Zayd bin Harith. Zayd.
Mr. Zayd.
So that's really all we have,
right?
And then after that, for 200 years, we really have nothing else. It's a complete vacuum.
And it's actually very bizarre that during the Umayyads' time, they seem to be very uninterested in Muhammad. Like there were so many documents, there were so many coins, so many documents, and it seemed like they had completely forgotten about Muhammad as a prophet. Like what's that about? Like this is a bizarre thing. Like up until the Abbasid times, I think, and they remembered like, holy shit, our prophet is Muhammad, right? Like, and they started talking about him. But there's a gap here that Muhammad was not mentioned that much. Is that accurate to say?
Well, yeah, but it's not. What's not accurate is that because they didn't care about him.
Right.
I don't know if it's that they didn't care about him as much or he wasn't that prominent. The thing is, there is just a massive vacuum in history for between 500 and um, 500 and 700. For those 200 years, there's very little. And
Yeah,
there
but they were
is
documenting other stuff. Like, it's not like they weren't writing down
around, yeah,
stuff.
no, we're talking about in that region. In that
Right.
region, they weren't, because when the Umayyads and the
I mean,
Abyssinians, the Umayyads and the Abbasids were fighting each other,
right.
then there was a lot of destruction of information. There was a lot of burning of books.
Right,
I mean,
but we
this is
have
something that people are.
we have shitload of coins from that time without Muhammad's name on any of them. Like, that's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, that is bizarre. I mean,
Okay.
and that's something that's been pointed out. That's one of the big gaps.
Right.
When it comes to the historical criticism of a lot of these documents, is that the first name of Muhammad actually appears on a coin that was, I think, around 690, around that time. Every date that I'm mentioning is just a range within 1 or 2 years.
Right.
So,
So,
I can't remember them off the top
a
of
lot
my
of
head.
people think, some people are suggesting that Muhammad could be an Abbasid invention. I mean, okay, so here's where the conspiracy theories come in, okay? There are a lot of conspiracy theories, and these are not like other conspiracy theories, because these are actual scholars saying these
Yeah.
things, right? So, and again, I haven't discussed this one with you, Elliot. I know we discussed the idea that maybe Muhammad was born in Petra in Jordan, according to, what was that guy's name?
Well, Dan Gibson.
Dan
Yeah.
Gibson, based on where all the qiblas were from the first.
But even if you
but-
even if you forget about Petra,
right, but
there's this idea that he was I mean, it's beyond Dan Gibson. A lot of people actually think that in the current Mecca, where it's located,
yeah,
right, in the Hijaz, the original Mecca wasn't there. It was in the Negev desert, where Petra is.
right.
So it was actually in the Negev desert.
So a lot of
Yeah.
people are saying there's no way the stories are true, right? Based on where Mecca is, like, there's no way there was a big city over there or something like that. Like, it was moved there later, right?
Mhm.
But there are also suggestions, serious suggestions, that Muhammad, and I don't know if you heard about this yet, that Muhammad, what does Muhammad mean? Muhammad means the chosen one, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? The blessed one, right? And some people say that is actually a reference to the anointed one, to Jesus,
Right.
right? And that the Muslims, the idea that people have is that Islam as a religion came, and then Muslims started invading some countries, and they start building the Islamic Empire. But now the suggestion is that actually it's completely the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
These Arabs were not Muslim until a long time later. Like, when these invasions happened, and these other countries recorded these invasions by these Arabs,
Yeah.
this Islam as a religion was never mentioned or observed by any of them, not by the Persians not by the Romans. And these were, especially the Romans, were obsessed with recording shit. They were just saying that these Arabs invaded them, and their religion was not mentioned. And it seems some people think that they were not Muslim. Islam was a later invention by the Arab Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And they just went back and rewrote their own history as a PR move. And the PR move originally wasn't even Islam. The PR move originally was a different brand of Christianity, where Jesus was not the Son of God, that Jesus was the prophet of God. And there was this huge obsession over just making the case that you guys have it wrong. Jesus was never a son of God. Jesus was just a prophet, and they were Christians. But then they wanted their own unique brand, and this is the survival of the meme. And they basically made their Muhammad, which was supposed to be Jesus, their own new prophet. And I don't know. Again, this is batshit crazy stuff. If it's not, I mean, this seems like crazy, but it's not coming from crazy sources. I mean, let me see
Hmm.
what the people in the live chat think about this. But go on, Ali. What do you think
Yeah,
about
the
this?
live chat is going like a million miles an hour. So
Uh,
let's just, yeah, I think that there's a lot there. I mean, I think the basic idea when we have this conversation, when we actually talk about this, we're not talking about jihad. We're not talking about what Muslims are like, whether you should be suspicious of them or not. The differences between all the Muslims. We're just talking about basic sort of historical facts that aren't even denied by Muslim scholars. I mean, everybody knows these things, and I think it's a much better debate to have if you want to talk about the legitimacy of Islam and its revelations and myths and all of that. If you talk about, well, how reliable is or just the process of oral transmission um, over 200 years versus documentation that we can actually read something that's actually tangible.
But have you
So,
heard what have you? Okay, but first of all, before I continue, we have genetically modified skeptic in
oh,
the
hey,
live chat, which I'm going to be traveling to Israel with.
uh-huh,
And
oh, nice,
one thing I'm hoping that me and him are gonna look at over there is when we go to the Dome of the Rock. What one person has suggested to me that there's evidence for what I'm saying about Muhammad being actually Jesus at the Dome of the Rock. By the way, he's saying his comment is kind of funny. He's saying Muhammad Mecca should be renamed Pedocube. Change my mind. Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Uh, you two, you and Ali get along quite well. You have the same taste for jokes. Theo is saying, can this be compared to Alexander the Great? He lived in 4th century BCE, and his primary biographers were written in the 1st century. I don't think so, Theo, because even if the stories about Alexander the Great are not accurate, the fact is that there's so much people. There were records of him leaving a place, and there are records of him arriving at a place. Like there's so much more that we have for somebody like Alexander than we have for Muhammad. Became an empire. It was the other. It's the other way around.
I've heard that. I've heard that a lot, and I've read about it too.
Right.
So there's a guy I'm going to recommend that you guys follow if you're interested in this. He's a scholar of Islam. His name is Ian D. Morris, and I think that's his Twitter account too. So he talks about this. I remember he posted something about that's the first time I heard about it,
Right.
about Islam basically being used as a tool for Arab conquests.
Right.
Um, and that's the argument with his Muhammad's name appearing on the coin. Like for the longest time, nobody really cared,
Right.
and then they realized that maybe they could use religion, the opiate of the masses, to
Right.
sort of unify people and get them together under something, and they use it as a manipulative tool, and that's how they kind of co-opted Islam. These were the Abbasids who did that.
Right. So
So
the speculation is that you have these Arabs were not empire. For this is actually this is a time in history. By the way, people don't have to understand how significant of a change the whole world was going through around this time. Right. Like people, they could not imagine a world without these two great empires, right? The Roman
uh,
Empire and the Persian
and the
Empire.
and the Persian, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, both of
like
them.
having other
And then this
empires,
coincided. This rose out of the ashes of
like
their downfall.
right, and this was like having the Roman Empire, fall, or the Persian Empire completely being completely being destroyed. At least Roman Empire had a new version of it after the fall of Rome. We had a new version of it that was even not even in Rome anymore, but. But the Persian Empire completely fell apart, which is like like for people at that time, this is like the whole world crashing. Like you could not for the longest time you had these two empires, right? All of a sudden, these people out of nowhere show up, and they end up being like an empire, like in a matter of no time, like nothing. But the thing is that the Persian Empire had thousands of years of worth of religious branding, like Zoroastrianism, And the Roman Empire had their own version. Like their empire went with a history of mythology or of understanding of your identity, of who you are, and how that works with your ethnicity, and how that works with your understanding of your place in the entire, not in just the world, but in the entire universe. So these Arabs, when they become an empire, they're like, yeah, we need a mythology. Like, we need our own identity. We need our own branding here to compete with these other branding. So the idea is that this Islam was created as a branding of this new empire, which is very interesting if that's how it turned out. But we need more scholars, and this is why it's such a crime, I think, that these things were not studied in the way like the Bible was studied academically for a very long time. And we are so far behind when it comes to Islam. And it's so much interesting content. And this is why I say Islam is actually...
Even the Bible actually wasn't opened up properly until just a few hundred years ago.
Right.
So it wasn't studied. I mean, these things were very taboo. So this is why I think, like, shattering this taboo is really, really important, and it's happening. And I gotta give a lot of credit to Tom Holland, who I really, really, really want to get on the show. And he, last time I talked to him, he was actually in the middle of writing his new book, which is out now. So he was in a completely different headspace, but he did say that he would like to consider it in the new year. So
nice.
Let's see if we can make that happen.
Wow.
But
that would be one of our best episodes.
Because a lot of this sort of academic scholarship around Islam and the Quranic criticism was also opaque, right? And it was opaque for different reasons. It was basically stayed confined within academic circles because it would just be too explosive if it came out into the public consciousness, right? So you couldn't bring it out there. The guy who did try to do it was Tom Holland. I think he's the first one who took all of this the scholarship that was being done around Islam and Quranic criticism in the last 30 or 40 years, and he put it into a popular book, for public consumption.
Right.
And when he did that, and he made that documentary,
the book, what's the book? In the Shadow of the Sword.
In the Shadow of the Sword. And when he did that, a brilliant book. And when he did it, he had just loads and loads of threats. He was attacked from all over the place.
Fuck.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was. That's a problem. And this was just a small taste of it. So imagine if the rest of it comes out. So it's slowly. I think we're getting to the point. As long as we start normalizing these conversations, we can have these bring out these aspects of the conversations as well.
So one of the go on.
No, go ahead.
One of the most important messages that you get right from the beginning when you start reading this book is how surprisingly the gap of information that we have from this period is actually very surprising. And it's actually also very surprising that for a very long time until recently, historians just went with the story that Islam offered, right? Like, they assumed, like, when they were writing history, or like when it came to this period around Arabia, they were like, okay, Muslims say this, and they just took that story and they filled that gap in history with the stories of Muhammad and what he did, and they just accepted the stories. And now what historians are doing, and we're like, wait, when did we just accept these stories? And now they're going to go look at the evidence, and not only, it's not that just the evidence contradicts it, it's that there's nothing. Like, it's actually surprising how little there is. Like, it's as if there was intentional erasing of information. Like, it's not, and this is again conspiracy levels. So I don't know if any of this is true, but given other stuff that was happening around those places and what you would expect, the void that is there when it comes to evidence shocks the historians that are looking at it. Which I don't know how to explain it, right? So that's something that you will see right away. So the fact that these stories was just assumed as true is now being challenged, and this is going to shake the Islamic world. It's going to, as these more of these stories come in. One thing I I appreciate when it comes to these stories is how much the Muslim community, at least, is in love with conspiracy theories, right? So,
Hmm.
and they, so that by itself might make them look into these stories, right? Imagine if we have like a new, a new branch of Muslims that start praying towards Petra instead of Mecca. That would be so cool. That would, no,
Well, I was just thinking, I mean, while you're there, why don't you pay a visit? I mean, you're going to Israel, right?
oh,
So all you have to do is you really just have to just go right across the border to Jordan. It's right at the border of Jordan.
well, I mean,
It's just south of the Dead Sea.
it's very actually we are planning the trip in great detail, and I actually can't afford to travel myself anywhere. These are great donors that are taking care of our we have our Illuminati is taking care of our travel expenses. So I myself can't.
No, because I was thinking like you could, because you can't go to the birthplace of the prophet
Actually, I
and pay
can't go.
homage,
I'm
right?
not going to go to
But
Jordan. Jordan is not safe for me, I think.
no, Jordan's fine.
No, Jordan is fine for average people. That's not fine for. Do you know how many
Yeah.
ISIS members are in Jordan?
Yeah. No, I don't actually. Why would I know that? I don't know.
There are. There's a shit ton of them. Even if Jordan government's not after me, it's not a safe place to be for
I
an
know Omar
exile.
Al Khadra's there. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. I mean,
yeah.
the way he talked about it. So yeah,
I'm not gonna go to Jordan. Sorry.
so there's one another part of the just moving on
Oh,
from
hey,
this is
wait. IRN is saying I can raise some funds if you want to go to Petra. Hmm.
yeah,
No.
you can go to
Can you
if
also
you want
raise
to do
some
that.
funds for a bodyguard?
Well, I mean, people from the people who visit Petra usually come from
Who
Israel,
are
right?
you?
Like they
ARN, reach out, message me on Facebook if you can actually help with travel expenses and stuff. But yeah, message me on Facebook. We'll talk. But go
yeah.
ahead.
So so another thing I wanted to move on to is these elements of Quranic criticism. When people actually talk about criticizing the Quran, what are the aspects of the Quran that you can criticize? Um, and that's the question. What are the aspects of the Quran that you can criticize? So first of all, there are a lot of contradictions. So you mentioned earlier on, Armen, the idea of naskh or abrogation, right?
Right. By the way,
So
genetically modified skeptic is saying if I go, if I get, I'll go if I get my own Pope mobile. Yeah, I'll go there also if I get my own. But go ahead.
it would be bulletproof.
Yeah.
Right. So so abrogation is this concept. It's an attempt to try to explain away the contradictions in the Quran, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of debate as to whether this is like a real thing or not. Some scholars believe that abrogation is a real thing, others don't. Right. So they basically say that if there are two verses that are in conflict, you look at the time of revelation and you discard the earlier verse and you look at the one that came later, right? So and there are terms for this. The new verse is called al-nasikh, and the abrogated or discarded verse, the older verse, is called al-mansukh. So this nasikh mansukh thing has been like a big attempt at trying to get to resolve some of the contradictions there, right? So
Right.
there's some verses in the Quran, like the verse Surah 2, verse 106, that says that older verses can indeed be replaced by newer ones. And it says, quote, "We do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten except what we bring forth one better than it or similar to it." As in, we would not get rid of a previous verse unless we had a better one. There's another one in Surah 16, verse 101. And that's a verse that kind of protects Muhammad from accusations of lying in case people say, hey, listen, you're lying, you're giving me conflicting verses. So that verse says, "And when we substitute a verse in place of a verse, and Allah is most knowing of what he sends down, you say, oh, you, O Muhammad, are but an inventor of lies, but most of them do not know." So it's basically defending this idea of replacing a previous verse with an earlier verse.
Right.
A previous verse with a newer verse, right?
Yeah, it's
So
kind of the Quran. I have to give it some credit.
it covers its tracks.
Yeah, it's kind of made itself bulletproof.
Yeah.
Like every contradiction in the Quran could be explained by this verse.
Right. So a lot of the apologists have a big problem with abrogation because many of the nicer verses, or the good verses, the peaceful ones, are the Meccan verses that came earlier. and the later Medinan verses are the more sort of violent ones. But then there is another complication to this whole idea of abrogation, and I'm just talking about this because the non-Muslims that I come across are very interested in abrogation, very interested in taqiyya. Taqiyya, as we
Taqiyya is
discussed before,
overblown.
yeah, it's overblown. It's just bullshit. If
Yeah.
you ever hear someone talking about, that so and so is doing taqiyya, then just they don't know they don't know what they're talking about. Um, but with abrogation, this is actually a serious thing. So there are three kinds, and the first kind, you have both the verse and the ruling. They're both discarded, right? So that means that we'd never heard of it. It's gone. Like there was a verse and the ruling, and they're all gone. In the second, the verse is discarded, but the ruling stands. So the most common example of this is what?
The goat
Stoning
eating?
to death.
Yeah, the goat eating.
Goat eating. So rajam,
Right.
or the
So the verse is
stoning
not
punishment.
there.
No.
This is what Omar actually did, right? So
Yeah.
so the verse is not there in the Quran, but they arrested somebody for adultery, and they asked Omar what to do with it, and they're like, yeah, you have to stone it. And like, but there's no verse, and it was like, yeah, but I remember the verse, so stone the motherfuckers. So and they stoned them.
And then Aisha, there's a hadith
Omar was
that Aisha
fucking
said that
brutal. He
Aisha had the verses under her pillow and they were eaten by a goat. That's actually a hadith. Or a sheep. Could be a sheep. Who knows?
no, it was a goat.
Okay, maybe it was a goat.
And also Omar killed his own, like his son Omar. Okay, this is the difference between Omar and Osman. Okay, the second Caliph and third Caliph. Osman, his whole family was drinking alcohol, and he never gave a shit. He actually gave them more power because they were family. Omar, his son drank alcohol, and then he ordered them to, whip his own son, and they did it until he fucking died. So Omar ended up killing his own son because he drank. So so they're very, very different. But go on.
Yeah. So, and then the third type of abrogation is the one that's the most common, the one that most people are familiar with, and that is that the abrogated verse stays in the Quran, but the ruling is discarded
Yeah,
in favor of the abrogating verse.
that's the most
So
famous one because
that's the one that, this verse doesn't mean anything. It says, the ISIS will tell you when it says, there's no
To each-
compulsion in religion. They're
yeah.
like, that was abrogated. So screw
Abrogated.
that. We don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's newer ones.
to each their
So-
own religion when you're not in power. Once you're in power, I mean, this is exactly what Muhammad did. When he wasn't in power, like you keep your religion, I keep my religion. And then when he was in power, like, yeah, a Muslim would get the fuck out or die. But go on.
Right. So now the question is that what does this mean? Like there's a Surah 4 verse 82 in the Quran says that the Quran has no contradictions, right? And so you have all these conflicting verses, and then so people who say that I don't buy abrogation, they point to this verse. They say Surah 4 verse 82 says there's no contradictions, and then they'll give you examples of how certain verses are just sequential and they're not necessarily contradictory. For example, there's one verse that says that people who fornicate are supposed to be bound in their homes either until they die or until Allah finds for them another way. And then there's another verse in Surah 24 that says that they should be given 100 lashes. They're like, well, which one is it? Are they going to be bound at home until they find another way? Or is it 100 lashes?
100 or 80?
100 lashes.
Why in
100.
Iran? Why is in Iran in the law 80? That's weird. Okay.
I don't know. It's math, maybe. Hijri math.
Okay.
So so it's 100 lashes. So so the people who reconcile this, for example, they'll say, well, that other way, Allah said that He would ordain for them another way. Later, the verse came down that was 100 lashes. That was the other way. So that's how they reconcile it, right? So. And then many of them who don't buy it, they say, well, this isn't about new verses or older verses. It's about older scriptures and newer scriptures. So previous scriptures like the Torah and the Gospels are now replaced in their entirety.
So you're saying
by the
that
Quran.
some Muslims say that all of the verses in the Quran apply. What that verse was referring to was not older verses in the Quran, but previous Abrahamic books.
Right. So
Right.
the
But some
previous
people say it means
Abrahamic
both.
Huh?
Some people say it's both.
It can. Yeah. Some people probably
Because
say
some
it's
people
both.
say the Bible and the Torah, the original non-corrupt, like the Muslims say. Okay, just to be clear, Muslims think that Islam did not start with Muhammad. Muslims think that Islam started with Adam. Adam was the first Islamic prophet of God. and he brought Islam, just like Moses brought Islam, just like
It's
Jesus
like
brought
Jesus
Islam,
brought us on.
just like
Yeah.
Abraham brought Islam, and Muhammad completed Islam. He basically sealed it, and he was like it was basically it was baby fed to humanity. Um, but the
Hmm.
Bible that we have today and the Torah that we have today is not it's the corrupted the Christians and the Jews. They corrupted the original um, scripture that God gave them. And if you look at it that way, Muslims would think that the original Bible that the Christians got, that we don't have a version of it today anymore, or the original scripture that the Jews got, that was an earlier version of the Quran, which was consistent with the Quran today, not a
Hmm.
complete version, but a smaller version of it. So the verses in there would be part of the Islamic scripture if we had
Yeah.
it, right? So the abrogation would apply to both earlier verses in the Quran that as we have today and the other verses that came before by God.
Right. Yeah. So this idea that the previous scriptures are the previous Abrahamic scriptures are the ones that are nasikh, and the Quran is the or the entirety of the Quran is mansukh, which means that the Quran has replaced previous scriptures. That is a popular version of abrogation as well, but it doesn't always work. Apologists tend not to like the whole idea of abrogation because it goes more in favor of the violent verses. But overall, I think the biggest argument against abrogation is just you have an omnipotent deity that's supposed to know everything, right? For eternity. And this Quran was revealed over a period of what, I don't know, a couple of decades.
Right.
Even within decades, completely changing his mind all the time. He's like, well, I had this previous verse, but hey, I thought of something new. So here it is. Here's a new
Okay,
one.
okay, I'm gonna put my Islamic hat on, okay? And this would be how I would respond to you as a Muslim, all right? The the reason for it's not that God changed his mind. The idea is that God understands that different situations require different uh, rules, right? So it's basically what God is teaching you is that when you start a movement, when you do this, and then when you're in power, do this, right? So that progress of the earlier rules and also like God also is not also understands that humanity is not ready for some rules, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like when you're a baby, you chew the food for them, but then when they grow up, you teach them hunting, maybe, I don't know, whatever. But it's basically God's understanding of humanity that basically applies different rules for different times. It's not that he changed his mind. His mind was always that this was going to be my original verse, and then later it's going to be replaced with a different rule.
Yeah. So to that, I would say that your Islamic hat that you put on is a tinfoil hat. Um,
What?
yeah, this is because I mean it's just it's a very I feel like it's a very transparent argument because I mean trying to wean people off of things, right? Is just not the MO of Allah in the rest of the Quran. It just doesn't seem to be consistent with everything else. So it's like for instance, they say, well, yeah, the people used to bury daughters
Yeah, I'm
alive,
trying
and
my
then God
this is my
came.
best Muslim I have. Like, I don't know. Like,
Hey, listen, it's
I'm
tinfoil hat.
limited to their shitty arguments. Okay, but
I
this is
you are.
this is their best shitty arguments. But go on.
I know this is devil's advocate, and the devil isn't really the brightest guy. But the
Okay. Right.
yeah, so I mean, this is what the problem with it is that there are again even that is contradicted because there are many places where God just lays down the law. Like they've made this argument for alcoholism, right? So in alcoholism, in Surah 64, it says that intoxicating drink is a blessing. This is a blessing, just like the milk you get from cows, just like from the grapes, the fruits of the palm trees. You get intoxicant and drink in which you find great nourishment and intoxication. So, reflect on it. That's one thing. And then later it says, don't pray when you're drunk. He's like, yeah, get drunk, just don't pray when you get drunk.
Yeah, because
And then after that,
yeah,
it says there's more bad in it than good.
Right.
And then eventually it says strong drink and games of chance are Satan's handiwork, so avoid them. So
Right.
with the apparently like there's a I guess it's almost like a 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous program. God's trying to wean you off of
Right.
alcohol.
Yeah. So
But when it came
that's what
to
the argument is. They're not ready to give up alcohol right
yeah, but
away.
hey, listen, when he wanted to ban pork, he's like, no pork. If you said don't bury daughters alive, don't bury your daughters alive. But slavery, alcohol, let's just wean them off. Slavery did not leave the Islamic world. It said, they say,
So
well,
God's
Islam ended
understanding of
slavery.
humanity is that pork is easier to give up than alcohol, and apparently slavery is not that easy to give up either.
It's not easy to give up because a lot of people in the Islamic world did not give it up until the 18th, 19th century.
Right. Again, I'm not. Don't think like What I'm saying is not my arguments. I'm just telling you what Muslims would say.
Armen,
But
I'm so confused. It's really the founder of Atheist Republic. I don't know, maybe turning into an
By the way,
apologist.
Theo Mikey is asking if we're going to mention what this guy, the guy with the two horns, right? What's his name? Dual.
Are you talking about Dajjal?
No. Dajjal is a Sunni thing.
Is it?
What was the guy? How do you say his name? The guy that people
Yep,
think is Alexander.
Oh, Zulfikar?
Oh, is it Zulfikar?
No, not Zulfikar. Sikandar.
No. How do you say this in Arabic? Theo Mikey, can you write the Arabic version of this? Let me copy paste this. Hold on.
Like the idea that Alexander was mentioned in the Quran and all that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't mentioned. There's this guy that has two horns apparently in the Quran. It was mentioned, but different people. Okay. Zulqarnain.
Dhul-Qarnain, yeah.
Qarnain,
Yeah,
yes.
there you go.
Zulqarnain, yeah. So some people think it was Alexander, but I don't know why.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
All
bullshit.
characters in this text are fictitious. Any representation, and it's
There was
purely
also
coincidental,
a
if any.
weird prophet that met Moses, and they went and killed a bunch of kids. Anyways, never mind. The Quran is weird. It's funny and weird and interesting. But
Yeah,
but think
it is.
about how more. Okay, but this is why I tell people that the Quran, Islam is a lot more interesting if you don't believe in it. Imagine how interesting this kind of analysis would be once we get more people looking into it from an academic perspective, right? The Quran becomes like a detective work that you're trying to do on a murder that happened 1400 years ago. Like it's a puzzle that the Quran and these biographies and all this, it becomes like a puzzle. It becomes an interesting game of figuring out what came from where and why. And the fact that it's not 100% solvable, it makes it even more interesting because it's like a mystery, right? It's like a movie, right? And it's so cool. This is so cool.
Well, that's
this is
what
so
I think.
much
I
more
think that-
cool than the way Muslims look at Islam. But go on.
That's why I think that all these conferences that we have, they shouldn't be based on groups. Like, okay, ex-Muslims doing this, ex-Muslims doing that, whatever. They should be based on topics. Like, if you have a topic, that if you have a conference that's called Quranic Criticism, Shattering the Myth of Inerrancy,
Right.
I think that would be amazing. I would love to have a bunch of people get together and talk about this.
Right. I mean,
and make it more topical.
And we want to also go to the next level. I mean, it's fun. We constantly have to point out that the Quran, if you take it as a guide to life, is fucking insane, right? We do have to say that. But I mean, at some point, we need to go to the next level, right? Like, I mean, how often are you going to say, yeah, wife beating, Quran, that's fucked up, obviously. Like, slavery, Quran, fucked up. Torturing people for not believing in a book, fucked up. Killing Jews, fucked up. Like, all of this is fucked up. I mean, the people that don't see how obvious that this is, I mean, okay, but I mean, we still have to remind people of how fucked up this is. But then the more interesting level now is this kind of stuff, right? To look at the Quran from a historical perspective. I mean, for example, look at the way the people that look at the Mayan religion, right? And the way that's being studied and the interesting history of that. And that is so much cooler and more advanced and more interesting than saying like the level that we are at with Islam when we're talking about it and criticizing it is as if we go to look at the Mayan religion and just say like, oh yeah, they had human sacrifice. That was fucked up. I mean, obviously, like yeah, like that's nobody's going to dispute that. That's such a basic thing that everybody would accept. Mayans believed in human sacrifice, and that was really fucked up, right? Okay, but looking at all the cool stuff historically, um, is something that's completely different. It's a completely different thing and more interesting and more advanced. But the thing is that with the Quran and Islam, we're stuck to that such a basic childish part we can't even convince people that you can't follow this as a guide to life. Like how fucking insane that you have to be to take this book seriously as a guide to life. But once we mature, once we move past that, there's something way cooler happening here that we need to look at. But go on.
Yeah, I think I think that's right. And it's another thing I'm thinking of that's very important. Why this conversation is important is that you tend to avoid the hashtag not all Muslims thing with this line of criticism. When you start talking about, I was just thinking when you talk about Quranic history, when we talk about some of the things we've discussed here, which isn't even scratching the surface, by the way, like the Sana manuscript, like that the first time that these biographies and the collections of hadith were actually put out. So all of these things that we're discussing, I mean, these aren't things where you can actually say hashtag not all Muslims, because these are, now we're talking about the things that virtually all Muslims believe, right? So
Right.
if you, for example, if you talk
Right.
about, so
Yeah,
if
you're basically if talking about these things challenges Islam to its very fucking core.
it's at the very core,
Right.
and the same goes for any religion. I think this is why that just going right to the fundamentals is really really the way to disrupt. It's the best way to disrupt, because you can sit here and you can have a conversation about jihadism is a part of Islam, and and people come, well, not all Muslims, most Muslims are peaceful, and they're right about that. You can talk about issues like immigration, and there is going to be, it's a lot of weak ground to stand on, because then what you're doing is you're conflating Islam and Muslims. But here you're not even getting to Muslims. You're talking about a time when Muslims did not exist, when you are purely discussing the theological,
Not theological,
the scripture,
historical.
the scripture,
Because we
the
don't.
historical, the scriptural.
No, yeah, because we don't make
foundation
theological
of it.
argument. That's just basically talking about fairy tales. But Theomaki,
Yeah.
now I see why Theomaki was talking about Zulkarnain. Because is that how you say it? That Zulkarnain? Ali, don't get distracted.
Sorry.
Ali.
Yeah.
Okay, don't get distracted.
Yeah.
Okay, tell
Uh-huh.
people not to interrupt you while you're on the show. Okay,
Yeah.
so
What's going on?
Theomaki is saying that now I understand why Theomaki is was talking about Zulkarnain. Is that how you say his name, Zulkarnain?
Yeah.
Yeah, Zulkarnain.
It's Dhul-Qarnayn. Yeah. I don't know.
Arabs have like 3 different kinds of Z. I have no fucking like the Zal, Zez, Zain.
Yeah. You ever seen History of the World?
History
When the guy, he says, "Can you read this?" And then he was reading it, and it's something in Arabic, and then I don't know if it's in Arabic or whatever, and then he reads it, and he goes, and he's like, "What? Do you know how to read Arabic?" He's like, "No, I'm just clearing my throat."
okay, okay, but now okay,
It's a terribly racist joke.
no,
Yeah.
okay, no, it's not. Okay, Theomaki, what he's saying about Zulkarnain confirms what you were trying to say, right? Regarding how questioning these things really goes at discrediting the Islamic stories, because Zulkarnain, basically what Theomaki is saying, let us know, ARN, if you think, if you agree with Theomaki. Earlier Islamic scholars identified Zulkarnain as Alexander, right? Such as Tafsir al-Jalalain. Jalalain, okay. Is that an authentic Sahih hadith, Theomaki? But the problem with that is that Islamic scholars began to take it back because historians discovered that Alexander was actually a polytheist who saw himself as divine and had a boyfriend. So basically, it was problematic that this Zulkarnain figure was, by early scholars, was referred to as being Alexander, because now they didn't want him to be Alexander anymore, right? So this is a mild version of showing how this could, if you go deeper into what actually history shows, could disrupt a lot of the Islamic narratives.
Yeah, it could. I think that Yeah, this would be a sort of a mild example, and the reason is
Yeah,
because there's a lot of interpretive variability there. So you can potentially interpret it. You can say, well, that interpretation was wrong. Well, this is a correct one, and it may not necessarily change anything. But when you point out, for example, in Surah 86, verses 5 through 7, where it says, "And witness what man was created from. It was a fluid ejected from between the backbone and the ribs."
right.
Right, which means that either semen or sperm are created in the chest cavity. Now, when you look at
Yeah.
that, that is purely and absolutely wrong. That is
Yeah,
just
but again,
unequivocally.
these are stuff that is so bullshit that I think that is just so tiresome of pointing how stupid the Quran is. If you take it, if I mean, if you look at it as
No,
a,
but but this is the important thing to point out because the word is right there. It seems like that to us because we're very familiar with
I
it.
know,
We're
but
bored with it. And,
at some point we want to go into this history kind of stuff, which is now a lot more interesting. That's what I'm saying. But we have to
Mhm.
kind of remind ourselves that we need to go back to the basics sometimes because there's so many people that take this shit seriously still.
Yeah,
But we do get bored with pointing out how ridiculous. I mean, if you look at it as just a historical document that is part of a puzzle, it's very cool and it's very interesting. But but if you look at it as a guide to life, then it's absolutely ridiculous, right? And I just think that is such a childish thing, that's such a basic thing compared to all these other discussions that we could be having. That is so sad that we still have to go back and be like, yeah, a book that promotes slavery is fuck. It's not a guide to life. I think it's the fact that we're still stuck there is holding us back from all these more interesting discussions that we could be having
yeah. I
about the
think
Quran.
these are, but I think there are different levels to it. I think that when you are there and you are discussing something that's so foundational,
Right.
you can talk about those aspects. It's also kind of good to what because one of the claims that's made is that a lot of things in the Quran that are scientific that nobody could have possibly known at the time, right? I mean, that's a big claim that's made.
What?
So, and they like they bring up the embryology verses.
Yeah, but
There's
that's
all these
fucking
embryo.
bullshit. The Egyptians
Of
and
course
the
it is.
Romans, they cut up
Well,
pregnant dead
Aristotle and
women.
Galen are the two people from whom most of the Quranic, almost all of the claims about the Quran's embryology, many of which are false, by the way. They're
Right.
completely false, right? That's where they come from. So they come from Aristotle and Galen, and Aristotle and Galen, like they also believed at the time, they thought that the uterus was just a place where the life is nurtured and it grows. It provides a home for it, but all of the genetic material or everything comes from the sperm drop, right? So that is the view that is in the Quran as well. And the funny thing is, for all of the claims about embryology the Quran has, there's one thing that it does not mention, that is the egg, the ovum. It doesn't,
Right.
because nobody at that time thought that that was real. And the egg contributes the majority of
I
your
mean, there's
genes
shitload of
of a
stuff
human
that the
being.
Quran doesn't mention that would have been
No, no.
extremely
As
helpful.
far as the embryology goes, when people say it's such
Right.
a complete and accurate account, so it's actually not.
It's
So pointing out those things and
it's
talking about
too
the reality of it,
basic.
I
I mean,
think.
obviously it's not. It's stupid the way that it talks about embryology. It's like
Mhm,
it's so stupid, and I just think like it's so bizarre that we have to make that point. I
mhm.
mean, we do still have to make that point, but I just
No,
don't.
but it is. I think it's important to make that point.
I know it's important. It saddens me that we still have to make that point. I'm not
I,
disagreeing with you that we have to
no,
make
but
that
this
point.
you're right. Like this, finding out the history of it is interesting. Another aspect of when we talked about the location of Mecca and whether it's in the Hijaz in Arabia
Right,
or in the Arabian Peninsula or whether it's in the Negev Desert, which is now in like Jordan, Israel,
right.
where the actual location is. So that's actually really interesting look in the
Yeah.
Quran as well, because the Quran is a reliable document from that time,
Mm.
and it talks about Mecca as a place that's being where it describes olive trees. It describes the kind of
Mentioned in the
uh,
Quran itself, not just that
yeah, the
hadith.
kind
Right.
of landscapes and the kind of agricultural
Right.
characteristics of the land of Mecca just do not compute with the Mecca that's in Hijaz right now, and they completely and that along with a whole bunch of other evidence points to the idea that it is most likely in the Negev desert. It was
Yeah, I
much
mean,
more known.
like all those trees and all the farming that the hadith and the Quran mentioned would be impossible impossible in Mecca, right?
Right. So when the Abbasids tried to cover it up, they didn't do a very good job. They should have been more thorough.
They should have done what? They should have went and put
When
like
they tried to cover up this idea of
that there was a Mecca. They
create
should,
a new Mecca and the
yeah.
Hijaz, they should have covered it up a little bit better. They didn't realize
Yeah.
that they missed a lot
Well,
of
I mean,
points.
they got away with it for 1400 years, so I said they got a good job. Theomaki is saying that the movie Ali was referencing was actually Spaceballs, not History of the World. He mismatched his Mel Brooks movies.
Oh no, that is a mortal sin. You're right. It was Spaceballs. Was it Spaceballs or History of the World? Well, they're both amazing movies.
Okay.
Let's check it out.
Um,
Like History of the World, Theomaki, I think that I have this one right. History of the World was the one where you see Moses, he's standing up and he's got his hands like up and the sea parts, or Red Sea parts. And then when he moves away, it turns out there was a guy with a gun behind him sticking him up.
but okay,
And
let's
that's
go.
why he
I'm gonna
stands
move
up.
away from this. I'm gonna go back to John is saying.
No, let's talk about Mel Brooks.
No.
Okay, go
One
on.
thing
Yeah,
actually John pointed to in the live chat is that if you actually look at what we have done with Judaism, is that archaeologists have beyond reasonable doubt proven that Jews were never slaves in Egypt. It was some other people, right? A much
Mhm.
lesser number of people, right? And basically that completely discredits all their books, right? Anybody that studies history will know that the Jews were not slaves on in Egypt, and they didn't migrate from Egypt to today's Israel, which is so we need some. It would be interesting if we have some definite proof about. I mean, we already have, I guess, the fact that
Wait. Sorry. What is that?
the
You
Jews
mumbled
were
a little bit.
the Jews were never slaves in Egypt. You know that, right?
No, I don't know that much about that.
Okay. So, based on the understanding of, based on what archaeologists tell us now, that the Jews copied that stories from other people that left Egypt. They never migrated from Egypt to today's to Israel. That story is completely made up, and we know that now beyond reasonable doubt, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that we have now actual historical proof that the Jews were actually the understanding is that it was an uprising against the rulers at the time. The Jews were always in Palestine. They never migrated from Egypt to Palestine. They
So
were
the
just
Red
there.
Sea thing, the Red Sea was never parted by Moses?
Ah, come on. All right.
Oh.
No. But there were some other people that did that. But actually, I mean, Judaism is not a religion. It's not a big religion. It's small. Like a lot of people think like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But if you want to look at it at a global perspective, you have to say Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism, not Judaism. Judaism is like so tiny. But if it was a world major religion, this would be a major hit to it.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, it should be a major hit to Christianity because Christians. Hey, wait a minute. So, what do you think? This might actually contradict what we said so far because we know now that this story is fake. Why haven't we used it against Christianity? Why this is not being shouted over the rooftops that we now have archaeological evidence that the Bible is false? It should
I
be.
think it has been used. It has been. Like this whole idea that it's not the word of God and it's been demoted to divine inspiration and all that crap that was actually written by those four guys, Matthew, Luke, Paul. Like I mean, it was there's a lot of that has been shattered. I mean, when you have these alternative narratives that come up, you always end up somewhere in the middle, right?
Wildwoody is saying, Armen, the proof for that is that they basically have the same art and pottery style as the Philistines around the time. No Egyptian influences at all. That also, but there's a whole bunch of things. Like there's a whole bunch of things put together. There was also, I mean, the story is that the Jews came and there was a war with the Philistines. But any war at the time, like they couldn't find any freaking arrows or swords that would show that there was a war, like as they would expect if there was a war. Like there's so if you go actually look into it, like go. I mean, don't trust me. Go do your own research, but the amount of work that these archaeologists do into putting these puzzles together is actually it's so impressive. Like once you
Mhm.
look at what they go through to come up with, like they're not just pulling these things out of their ass. Like I'm not doing their work any justice. You guys go research this yourself. But once you go down that road, you start appreciating how their methods and how skeptical they are of anything they say themselves. Like it's not like they just look at something and they're just like, okay, this is this. Like they have very high standards for what they accept, and even when they come up with theories, they suggest that this could be a plausible explanation, but we don't know yet, right? So go down that rabbit hole, see how it's a whole
Mhm.
world that should get more attention. There needs to be
Yeah.
more. You know how in science we have people that are science communicators that there's because when people actual scientists when they have published papers out there, it's too complicated for average consumption. But then we have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Carl Sagan or Richard Dawkins that are good science communicators, and they go take all that complicated concepts and they bring it and explain it in a way that for mass consumption that the rest of us could appreciate. And I think there needs to be more of that when it comes to archaeology and the work that is done in history and how historians come to the conclusions that they come about, because I think there's not enough appreciation for that.
Mhm.
Go on, sorry, Ali.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, we gotta wrap up soon in the next
Okay.
like 5-10 minutes. So let's switch to let's go see. And I know we've been addressing a lot of the patron comments throughout this, so
Right.
because it seems like this has been a really engaging conversation. Everybody's really really involved in it, so
Right.
that's kind of cool. But let's go through it. Is there anything that stands out at you, Armin, that you wanted to bring up?
No, I just want to
Do you
make
guys have any questions that
last minute question. Tag secular jihadists if you want us to read any last minute questions, like new ones, not the ones above. If there's something that you really want us to read, that is
yeah.
relevant. But I'm really looking forward to when we say these we need to have more credible people that we listen to, not just people based on experience and stuff like that. We're gonna bring these guests on. If you know people yourself that you want to suggest, again, a lot of people come to me with guest suggestions. Ali is the one that schedule. I do the technical stuff, like prepare the live streaming, the YouTube and stuff. Ali is in charge of finding and scheduling guests, so he's the person that you need to be suggesting the guests to. Okay?
Mhm. And I want to make some recommendations for you guys to go out and watch. I mean, one is a that I actually love. There's a discussion between Abdullah Samir and Abdullah Gondal called "Has the Quran been preserved?"
Hmm.
or "Is the Quran preserved?" Something like that. And I think that that's where Gondal actually goes ahead and he shares his screen and he talks about the Sana manuscript. He actually shows parts of it. He talks about all the discrepancies between that and the Uthmanic Quran, and it's just a completely riveting thing. It's a long video, but it's amazing.
Hmm.
Another thing I would recommend is obviously Tom Holland and In the Shadow of the Sword. That book, if you can get your hands on it, you should read it. The Dan Gibson documentary that's called Sacred City, and that's about Petra
Oh yeah, that's
um,
so cool.
and the Qibla.
Just
It's brilliant.
go on YouTube, search for Sacred City, and that will give you a documentary that shows you about the argument for why Muhammad's story was in
Oh,
Petra.
and
Not,
so many arguments, so many amazing. That's really,
it's
really good.
so good. I
Yeah,
recommend and
to
not
the extent that he's not a mainstream scholar, but he has caught the attention of so many Islamic
yeah, yeah.
scholars, half of whom are outraged by him, and half of whom are like they've been
Like
forced to take him
like
seriously.
the way you can tell if something is just a bullshit conspiracy theory or not. Um, I mean, for if you're not yourself an expert and you don't know if you can trust somebody or not. I mean, I'm not saying what he's saying is true or not, but the way you can see if if you could dismiss it as somebody just coming up with nonsense or not is if other scholars are taking these claims seriously, right? So I'm not saying that's proof that it's true, but that's proof that he's not pulling out of nowhere, like out of his ass. Like there's something to it, right? And this guy's claims are being taken seriously. Even the people that are denying it are at least taking it seriously
They're
enough.
engaged.
They're engaged.
Yeah.
They're at least engaging it, and they wouldn't deny every random argument out there. The fact that they go out of their way to deny it means that this is something serious that somebody's putting on the table.
Right.
Some comments from
And also, one more thing I wanted to mention, just to summarize, and I mentioned it before. Ian D. Morris on Twitter. If you follow him, he's got some really, really fascinating threads about just Islamic history, written from the point of view of non-Muslims, Muslims, everybody. So he has a lot of really interesting stuff about Islamic scholarship there. Yeah.
Theo is saying Israeli archaeologists have really unearthed that much of the Bible's narrative is not historical but mythical and legendary. Look up the work of Israel Finkelstein. So that's what Theo is recommending for the stuff that we said regarding the Bible. Genesis is saying, please invite Hamid Abdul Samad.
Yeah, Hamid Abdul Samad is amazing.
Okay, can you invite him?
I will try to. He's hard to get in touch with. I know we tried to do it like about a year ago, but I'll try and ping him again.
Right.
And
Tweet
Theo
at him.
also mentioning
Anybody that knows him, please let him know that we want him on our podcast. But go.
Yeah. Then Theo Mackie also says, don't forget to recommend the work of Ibn Warraq.
Yes.
He's absolutely right. Ibn Warraq, Why I'm Not a Muslim, is one of the seminal ex-Muslim books from a very, very long time ago. So he was a pioneer. I had the honor of doing an event with him. I was actually sitting right next to him, and we did an event together with ex-Muslims North America with Muhammad Sayed in New York City this past July. There's an entire video. The entire event is on video, and it was on this idea of the Muslim Enlightenment. And he had some really interesting things to say about it as well.
NCROC is saying, bring on Dan Gibson.
Yes. Yeah, I had an interesting kind of thing with Dan Gibson. I wrote to him, actually got his email, which was really hard to find. And I got in touch with him. And I said that, this is our podcast called Secular Jihadists. And he's like, okay, what if I'm not an atheist? But I was like, listen, we just want you on. We just want you to talk about this stuff.
What the hell?
But he's very press shy for some reason. He doesn't do a lot of interviews.
Interesting.
Okay. But I'd love to get. I haven't reached out to Ian D. Morris though, but I would love to reach out to him too.
If you get somebody like Tom Holland's then we could use that as an example. Send them to so that they see that we're not gonna bite them or anything if they come on the show.
Yeah.
Like if you have some shows that you could send them so that they could see that, if you're not an atheist, that's not gonna be the topic of the show. Their work is okay. Okay, Christian Prince. Who's that?
Yeah, someone wrote something about Christian Prince. What was
I don't
that?
know who's that.
I don't know. I don't know what this is. So
somebody else is also No, they're saying Christian Prince books are full of Islamic hidden knowledge. Oh, a lot of people are suggesting Christian Prince. Look that up.
Let me look it up.
Rapper.
Just make sure it's not some like neo-Nazi or something that we're.
We should have neo-Nazi on our show.
I know, but that would be.
Oh no, actually no, we can't because YouTube.
No, Christian Prince is an author.
Yeah.
Quran and Science in Depth, Sex and Allah, The Deception of Allah. So he's apparently this controversial kind of guy.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
add it to the list of people that you're going to consider. Anyway,
seems like a Christian guy who's very anti-Islam.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But anyway, let's see.
All right. Okay. Cool. I mean, if we have a Christian guy that is anti-Islam, if we bring them on the show, I'm going to be very tempted to shit on Christianity to see what they're going to say. Like, I can't help it. I'm going to.
We had this whole. Yeah, we had. I was recently on Abdullah Samir's show, the YouTube show, and we talked about that quite a bit because I think he had a guest on who was an ex-Muslim who became Christian, and he had him on with Abdullah Gondal.
Right.
And it was just you should just go watch it
yourself.
Yeah,
actually we had Christian ex-Muslims at the Australian in the conference in Australia, and it ended up being a shit show. Like we started,
I'm
like the rest of us started shitting on Christianity, and you should have seen the look on their faces. They did not appreciate it. But
I'm gonna speak at a Unitarian church in Oklahoma this summer, so I'm interested to see how that turns out. I mean, Unitarians are obviously a little different than mainstream Christians. It's a very different kind of vibe. So let's see how that goes.
Mike is saying that he actually messaged me about a white nationalist that has been concerning me. Okay, but again, send message. My Facebook inbox is absolutely it's a nightmare. Okay, all my inboxes are a nightmare. So if anybody is messaging me anywhere and I'm not seeing it, and please don't get upset with me, please, because honestly, like I probably need 5 secretaries to be able to manage all my inboxes, but.
Yeah.
But I'm trying. Okay, I'm trying. But Theo Mikey,
I would actually have usually what happens is people who remind me and nudge me again. They're like, "Oh, by the way, I sent you this email." Worked out. If you don't hear from us the first time, please. And I know this is terrible. We're really, really sorry. We should ideally, in a perfect world, respond to emails immediately. Yeah. But in case we miss it, just don't feel bad about reminding us. It's just an email, right? So. If you just nudge us and say, "Hey, listen, I emailed you before. I'm just bumping this up to the top of your inbox." If you say that, I'm just more likely to notice it. So
right. And message Ali with regards to guest suggestions, please.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Theo Mikey saying I'm not upset. So we thank you, Theo. And also, okay, so we're gonna go now. Thank you everybody in the live chat. Thank you, Beej. Thank you, Zia. Some people I can't. Can you help me out here? I can't pronounce. People.
I can't. There's like Hazem. There's Wild Woody. There's
is in the live chat.
Beach. There's Sharon Samuel. I mean, there's like 100 people here. So I'm sorry I can't name all you. Zia Rahman. Mars, Aaron, all of you guys. Thank you very much. And then
live long and prosper.
We'll be back soon.
Yeah.
I just want to end with go to secularjihadist.com, go to patreon.com/sjme. If you can support the podcast with Patreon, you can do it for as little as $1 a month.
We also have
if you do that, you get access to all live videos while we stream them, while we do our interviews, and you can see all of everything that you hear on iTunes. You can hear live. Go to iTunes and leave us a review.
Also, okay, we also have a PayPal option. It's in our website and also in the description. But Ali, I didn't tell you. We also kind of now have a subscribe star option for people that don't want to do Patreon.
If you don't want to do Patreon,
it said the link is in the description for that as well. But if you click on it, it's going to tell you that our account is under review. So soon the link is there, but soon that will be also an option, subscribe star. And also the good thing about subscribe star, Ali, is that they allow cryptocurrency. So once I set that up, because there are some people that want to support the show, but they don't want like an electronic trail. I don't know that they're supporting the show. So we're gonna have cryptocurrency options for supporting the show as well.
Oh, cool! Now we can genuinely get Illuminati support.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Fucking amazing.
Okay, cool. Anyways, thank you for all the people that have supported us so far. Because you're responsible for making these shows possible. So really, 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 really thank you. And we're gonna continue doing this, and I think we're going in a very exciting direction. So let us know if this is good, if you're happy with these kind of shows. Anyways, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Love you all.
Bye bye.